Hi, everybody. I hope this finds you really well and you're having a good time. I'm at a Sunday night where I am, but wherever this finds you, I hope you're, again, having a nice day and everything's gone pretty well for you. And so I haven't been making videos for a while because I've been very, very busy with work and traveling. I traveled out to New Mexico last week and did a bunch of different things like that. And that has kept me very busy. So anyway, I just realized my thing was playing twice. So anyway, I'm going to be making a couple of videos. This is video one of two videos on progressive Christianity. And one of the reasons I'm doing this is because I once probably would be considered a progressive Christian. And so the question is, do you go from progressive Christianity to atheism, or do you go from progressive Christianity to more evangelical Christianity or more traditional beliefs in Christianity? Before I move on, though, I wanted to say hi to people in the chat. So I see the world teacher, Jagaduru, if I said that right, or no, Jagad Guru, Hellbound Heathen. Haven't seen him in a while. Good to see you, Hellbound. Good to see you, Brother Timothy. It's been a while, too. So welcome in here. So I hope you don't take this terribly seriously because it is meant to be slightly humorous, my little picture that I made here. So, but this is the process. And I say hi to Slam RN, too. This is the process that is the usual thing if you become a progressive Christian. And so let's first define our terms. What is a progressive Christian? Traditionally, progressive Christians do not believe the biblical authority of the Bible. And a lot of times they take a lot of liberties with their feelings about God and their feelings about God's omnipotence. And so I'm quite familiar with a lot of different YouTube channels where people have identified themselves as progressive Christians, or else they just happen to have these views. And so how I was when I was in my 30s is I was reading a lot of books by people like Wayne Dyer. And Wayne Dyer comes up with this idea that the self is sacred. And so I was noticing that sort of theme that goes in with a lot of progressive Christianities. They feel that their selves, their own personal opinions, their egos, their thoughts are probably superior in some ways to other people's, especially to, and even to God's in some cases. And so the very first step in progressive Christianity, and a lot of times these people are ones who came from very fundamentalist backgrounds. And so they start slipping away from the fundamentalism. A lot of times they grew up in families that told them that the earth it was made in 6 days and that they have to believe that. And if they don't believe that they're not a Christian and that God is not going to love them anymore and they're going to hell. And that is not something that I've ever heard or I've ever espoused myself. It was never told to me, in other words. So the way I was raised was more of a liberal Christian in a Catholic family. And I believed that God was, of course, omnipotent, omniscient, and had sovereignty. I definitely believe that. But I wasn't even sure about Jesus's resurrection, and I certainly hadn't taken any time to read the Bible. So I was just in that sort of a camp for a really long time. So I wasn't even to these 3 steps that are right here, where you get to the point where not only do you say you're not sure about things, but suddenly you decide that you're going to deny it. So I think once you get to these steps, that's when you get into trouble. So you see right here, the very first step you see is where it starts off with the person says, I don't think that God is omniscient. There's not a way that God knows everything. He's not concurrently in our past, present, and future. He has not granted us free will, those kind of things. So that is the position that some people take. They deny God's omniscience, omnipotence, and his sovereignty. And that's the very first step. Then they get to the next step and they start saying, well, I looked at the Bible and I don't agree with some of the passages in the Bible. In fact, when I went back to the Old Testament, I saw some descriptive events which I felt I wasn't very comfortable with. Therefore, the Bible must not be authoritative. Maybe it was just written by man and I'm not going to believe it. I'm not going to believe what the Bible says. Now, some have taken the view that they'll take the Marcionite kind of view and say, we'll take the Bible, but we're just going to believe the parts that we like. So we're only going to believe that God inspired the Gospel of Luke. That's what the Marcionites thought, because they were anti-Semites and they didn't understand the God of the Old Testament. They thought he was quite different from the God of the New Testament. Now, let's be sure the God of the Old Testament is quite strict. It's really a show that Jesus's moral code is very strong. And so in that environment under ancient Israel, under Mosaic law, the rules were very strict. That's just how it was. And so breaking the rules in that culture was something that God abhorred. He also abhors sin. But that was the rules. Those were the ways it were. When Jesus came, he ushered in the new covenant. And the idea of the new covenant is two big commands: love the Lord above yourself and love your neighbors as yourselves. Oh, yes, those are the two big commands. But anyway, I digress. So that's the second step, denying the biblical authority. And we have people like Randall Rouser who seem to take this approach. He's been on my channel a couple times. Really nice guy. I like him a lot. I just completely disagree with him on his opinions with respect to the Bible's authority. In fact, he's written a book called Jesus Loves the Canaanites. I actually had him on my channel to talk about that book. And he has this idea that God actually did not really say some of the things that are in the Old Testament about God with respect to the Canaanites. However, what we do know about the Canaanites is they were pretty awful people who were having incestuous relationships in the temples in front of their gods. That was the way they worshiped their gods. And then they were burning their kids at the altar under the hands of Baal and Molech and these other gods because they wanted to have better crops. And so they were really a terrible people. And so God moved them out of the land. But anyway, here we go. So that's the second step. Then the third step is to deny Jesus' resurrection. Now, this is the most critical step. This is the most solid foundational belief in Christianity. In fact, I don't really feel that you can say you're a Christian. This is a term that unfortunately has become very loose these days. But to say you're a Christian and deny Jesus' resurrection, to me, doesn't seem to fit together. However, some people do that. They say, yes, I'm a Christian, or I am happy to identify with Christians, but I'm not going to look into Jesus' resurrection and see any facts surrounding him. And so, yeah, I'll agree with Slam RN. Picking and choosing what God says is very dangerous. That's a problem. So the question is, and this is a question I'm also going to look at in the next video when I look at a video between Pine Creek Doug, Nathan Ormond, and they spoke about Randall Rouser. What they said is that is progressive Christianity sort of the gateway to atheism? Now, in the chat, what do you think? Do you think that once you're a progressive, you're slowly moving down this path that I identified right here and then falling down into atheism? Is that the step? Or does progressive Christianity lead to evangelical Christianity? What do you think about that? Now, in my case, I woke up from progressive Christianity because there was one big question that I needed answered. And it was answered for me. And so what was that one big question? I needed to know who Jesus was. I wasn't sure about him. I didn't know if he resurrected, and I hadn't spent any time looking into the Bible. But what I did want was to know the truth. And I prayed for it and prayed and prayed and prayed. I said, if you're out there, just show yourself to me. I don't know what your form is. I need to know the truth. And so, as I've mentioned before, I found myself on a plane sitting next to a pastor who told me about C.S. Lewis's books. And when I went home, I immediately ordered them. And Mere Christianity, I saw the trilemma. And it just told me, no, Jesus is not a great moral teacher. That's not what he was teaching. People don't go around and forgive other people. And of course, he committed all kinds of miracles and did some wonderful things. But people who claim to be a mere moral teacher are not going around forgiving people for the sins that others have committed. That's not what they do. So what he said, a man who is merely a man and did the sorts of things that Jesus did would not be a mere moral teacher. Either he was a lunatic, or he was a liar, or he was Lord. And so he said, let's not come to any patronizing nonsense about claiming that he's just a great moral teacher. That's exactly where I was. That's where a lot of Muslim people are today. A lot of Jehovah's Witnesses are in that camp today. But that's not what Jesus said, and it's not what he did. And so if we look to the truth and we look to the evidence surrounding the resurrection, we'll be led to the truth. Jesus, who was he? He is sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. One day we'll see him coming in the clouds of heaven. Now, kind of related to these topics, and just the fact that I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on today with respect to the world. That's pretty crazy. But one of the things that are going on today is the idea that a lot of these prophecies that we're seeing are being fulfilled before our eyes. So in the book of Revelation, And I wanted to shout out to Sentinel Apologetics if he happens to listen to this video, because I finally finished most of his book, his 387-page book that he wrote and shared with me on the book of Revelation, on his commentary on the book of Revelation. But one of the things that he pointed out is talking about what the end times look like, what we expect from Jesus in the end times, and sort of the authoritative figure of Jesus in the end times. And the book of Revelation, Ezekiel, and Daniel all give us a picture of the end, and so does Isaiah. And so we knew that Jesus would be the light of life, and we knew he would see the light of life, and that's fulfilling Isaiah 53 and all kinds of other places in Isaiah that refer to him as a light. But we also know in the end he's going to come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. And what we're seeing that's come back to life is things like Israel resurrecting in 1948 after 1,878 years of being gone, wiped off the map. So we see stuff like that. We're also noticing this trend towards the one world government that people like the Great Reset are putting out, the World Economic Forum. They call it the Great Reset, I should say. And so we're seeing that kind of thing. But beyond that, that's just something you want to look for. What I would encourage you to do, and this is what they're discouraging people to do, they say by the year 2030, and this is in a Forbes article, so I'm not making it up, they say everybody's going to be renting and they're going to be happy. But they also say there will be a contingent of people who are not happy with that system. These will be the people in the city who are happy with the system, where they're renting their homes. In fact, when they use their home, they're inside the home. But if they leave the home to go to work, the people who own the home will actually rent it out to other people. So people could be having an office in your house when you're away. They also say it'll be a complete lack of privacy. They're coming up with ways to have surveillance on people, very similar to the social credit process in China. And so we're seeing that sort of thing play out. And so lots of lack of privacy, no ownership. My advice to you is, as soon as you can, watch the market right now. It's a bit high. It's probably going to pop a little bit, the real estate market. But as soon as you can get in and own. You don't want to be subject to people's moving rental prices, which is what we're seeing in a lot of states right now, where people are upcharging in a big way on rent. The also thing that you want to pay attention to is a one world currency. We don't want that. We don't want some sort of monitoring system on our currency, which is what we have essentially with credit cards. So try to pay cash for a lot of things if you don't want the government sort of nosing in on exactly what you're doing. But the reason I'm mentioning all this stuff is it very much relates to what we see in the book of Revelation. We see that a lot of these predictions were being made, that there is going to be a move towards a one world government. And out from this, we're going to see this sort of an antichrist. And the antichrist is going to come in a group of three. There are going to be three of them, a beast, an antichrist, and a serpent. And they're basically going to try to wage a war on the world. And there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen in the end times. But one of the things that they say we want to avoid is what they call the mark of the beast. And so we want to keep away from all of that. So that's the old 666 numbers. And interestingly, Nero, in around the year 66 or so, also his name apparently also spells out the 666 numbers. So we had a pre-Antichrist. We've had Antichrist through the centuries who have been pretty awful. And so, yeah, I agree, Brother Timothy, that God is perfect. And I agree with Slam that God is perfect. And so I think we're on the same page there. So the bottom line is on progressive Christianity is, I think it can be very dangerous if you take that route and you rely too much on yourself and not enough on God. I think that's the bottom line with all of Christianity. In fact, I've talked to an atheist recently in one of, I won't say exactly how I'm affiliated with this particular person, but I talked to him and he said one of the reasons why he came to atheism is because he felt that his prayers weren't being answered. And I think that that's a lot of reasons. And he said he realized he had to do things for himself and he wasn't going to count on God to do things for him. Now, God is in the background. He is sort of watching the world and making sure everything works out to its best and to its ultimate, the way he wants it. But sometimes God does not seem to intervene in some of the things that happen today. And people look at that and they say that must mean God doesn't exist. It doesn't mean God doesn't exist. It means that we're in a, unfortunately, morally very deficient world, enemy-occupied territory, as C.S. Lewis calls it. And there's a lot of evil out there. And just because there's evil out there doesn't mean that there's not a loving God who still wants us to be able to pull through it. That's the whole soul building idea. And so the reason why I mentioned that one person is because he decided he was going to count on himself, as I said. And that's sort of a dangerous thing. It's always you, your ego, and versus God. And people sometimes don't realize your ego is actually your enemy. You've got to somehow muffle the ego. And once you do, once God decides you're ready, he will open your eyes. That's how it works. Might take 20 years, might take 30 years, but he does it. And so, yes, I do also believe there's many dark forces out there. I think Christians don't talk about it enough. There's absolute spiritual battles going on in the world. It's confirmed all throughout the Bible. So it's not like something that just appeared in the New Testament with all of the curing of demons and things like that. We certainly saw a lot of it in the Old Testament as well, in areas such as the Nephilim. We also saw it in areas such as when we also saw it in areas like in the book of Daniel, when Gabriel came to Daniel and said that he had been fighting off, was it Gabriel or Michael? It was one of the angels, one of the archangels came to Daniel and said he'd been fighting off the prince of Persia, a spiritual being. And so we do see it in these other books. So the bottom line is, as Paul said in Ephesians, make sure you've got your breastplate of armor on and armor up, because there is a lot of bad stuff going on out there and a lot of misinformation. And speaking of misinformation, there are topics I don't feel very comfortable covering on my channel, but one of the topics is very much related to something that is a tragedy going on today. And it's the idea of, who are we? What is it inside of a woman's belly? What is a woman? And so there's a lot of stuff going on right now that we need to pay attention to, but it all boils down to God's preemptive work in this area. He told us in the beginning, made man and woman. It made him in his image. We were made in the image of God, man and woman. And the woman is made from the man. So there's also a hierarchical order that God put in place. Now, when I was more of a feminist, and this is going back to those progressive years, when I was more of a feminist, and not the feminist the way they are today, because today's feminist to me is kind of sometimes have gone off the deep end, some of the feminists. But the kind of feminist I was I would look at the Bible and say, I want to see women in all these same roles as men. I want to see all this kind of stuff. I want to see women leading the churches, all that stuff. And then I went and looked at what God said. And God established a very specific order in the church, a work role order. So it goes Jesus, then the man, then the woman. And it's not just in one passage. There are multiple passages where God set up this particular structure. Now, why did he set up that structure? That's the question you ask. Some say, oh, that was just the structure of how it had to be back in Ephesus, or that was just a structure how things had to be in those days. They were trying to get back at the Diana, the one god Diana, or they were trying to get to the women who were very controlling in this one particular church. I don't think that's the case. I think that structure set up by God to preemptively activate our knowledge of how we should act today in today's world. Not to say women can't make it to the top of business corporations. That's certainly a possibility, and that's not something that God's limiting. God's not saying that women can't go to work. Absolutely not. God had a lot of women like Junia and Lydia and others in high-level positions, even within the church, just not in the senior level pastor role. But what God was saying, and what we're supposed to take as today, is he's also looking at the family structure. Women might be the workers in the family. That's fine. Maybe some men can't work. That happens. Sometimes men get disabled or something happens. But in the family structure, it still works the same way, where there's the president, the vice president, and then the children who are going to be the subordinates. And so that's the structure, and that's the way it works. And so that the ordering is quite specific in the family, and the ordering is quite specific also in the church. Now, why is that? Well, a lot of that is because it's preemptive against suddenly people coming out and trying to change around the whole system, trying to do a number of different things. And so that's one of the things that we can use when we're trying to figure out how to respond to various issues going on today, is look back to the Bible and see, how did God already address these issues? How did he already address the Muslim faith? Well, he warned us that the Antichrist, he warned us that in Galatians 1:8 said, don't pay attention to even an angel. Okay, Muhammad claims that the angel Gabriel appeared to him inside a cave. Initially claimed it was a demon, but his sister convinced him it was actually Gabriel. That same exact thing with Joseph Smith. He claimed the angel Moroni appeared to him. Jesus preemptively attacked those ideas. Okay, just like he's preemptively establishing an authority the way we're supposed to view it. So that is what's going on with that. And so I want to say hi also back to everybody here in the chat. So we got Brother Timothy, Taking Back Eden, Hellbound Heathen, and Lilith. Yeah, Lilith. I see a lot of people on Twitter who call themselves Lilith. I don't know who they why they do that so much. I know it has something to do with some story that was supposedly in the Bible initially about Lilith, who was this person. I'm surprised some of them don't call themselves Jezebel, because it's pretty much the same idea. So so that classical omnipresence is the idea of, I have up there omniscience and omnipotence. I actually didn't put omnipresence or omnibenevolence because I think that could take us down some tangents. But I do believe in both of those. So, Adam's first wife. Yeah, I think that's something like that. So that's the idea. So they call themselves Dark Lilith or things like that, or heathens. We see a heathen in the audience. So anyway, so the bottom line on my video is just watch out for progressive Christianity. Watch when you start really counting on your own beliefs to the detriment of God's. It's not saying you shouldn't be self-sufficient and you shouldn't work hard and do a lot of stuff for yourself. They say God helps those who help themselves. That's not my point. My point is that once you count on yourself, ignoring God and leaving God out of it, and not counting on God to help you, assist you, work with you, work through you. Once you do that, you're moving away from God. And Romans 1:20 tells us that he allows you to do that. If you want to question him, you want to disregard him, you want to move past him, God suddenly will hand you over to a reprobate mind. That's not where you want to be. We can see a lot of that in society today. Hate to say it, but there's a lot of reprobate minds out there, and a lot of them are on Twitter. A lot of them are on YouTube, and I'm sure after watching this video, a lot of them will be posting comments that say derogatory things about me. And so that's the kind of thing that we get. So it's an interesting thing, and it's okay if you have that. It's not that you can't repair it. All you have to do is repent. It's really easy. And that's actually the one thing that differentiates Christianity from all of these other faiths. We have Jesus. So we have a leader who was without sin himself and to whom we can go in no matter what condition we're in. I mean, look at Saul. Saul was talking about murdering Christians. He was figuring out how to round them up and throw them into prisons. Look at him. He was standing at the foot of St. Stephen when they were stoning Stephen. And what happened? Jesus called on him. He called on here this big sinner. He also was working in the pits, not the pedestals, in his ministry with people in the streets. He was dining with tax collectors. People thought those were the lowest of the low. People who collected taxes gave it to the wealthy people. They lived huge dichotomies. So the rich were really, really rich, and the poor were really, really poor. And the rich really didn't give the poor people anything for their taxes. So it's really like they were just stealing their money. So the taxpayers were viewed in really negative ways. And here, Matthew, the tax collector, was one of Jesus's disciples. That's pretty special. And we also know that Mary Magdalene had a history. She had to have demons knocked out of her, and she apparently must have had a history, possibly as a prostitute or something like that. So she had a bad history. And other women that had associated with Jesus also were people like the adulterer and prostitutes and the woman at the well and all these other people. And so there were people who were not doing the right thing. Jesus works with them. He also wasn't rubbing elbows with the high-level people, the governors. He was rubbing elbows instead with fishermen and people of more humble statures. And so that's just what he does. So he will open the eyes of anybody if you're willing. That's what Jesus does. That's what he's about. And that's why you need to call on him. It's really important. If you're in trouble and if you're in need, call on him, count on him, put your faith in him. It is very much worth it. And that's what I want to say. And so, okay, so maybe I'm wrong about Mary Magdalene being a prostitute. I think it's in the latter pages of Mark where they talk about the Mark 16:9-20, those passages that are so contested that I don't think should be contested. In there, they say they cast out some demons. I believe that's where I saw it. So maybe she wasn't one, but we certainly know that there are some who were sinners who were wiping Jesus' feet and doing things like that. So we have that kind of thing. So I want to say thank you guys for coming in tonight. Please like, subscribe, and do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. I want to say, Slam RN, she's got a little clarification here, so I'm going to throw this up here. Pope Gregory did a sermon on Mary Magdalene as a prostitute. That is where the rumor started. Ha ha. So that's it. Yeah, so rumors get started, and we have to figure out how to put those out. And so I'm going to be back on here on Wednesday. I'm going to play a little bit of a video with Randall Rouser, and it's going to talk a lot about Jesus at 12, because Randall Rouser, who's a progressive Christian, is very much concerned with why Jesus would allow his parents to search for him for this period of time when he was in the temple teaching people at the age of 12. And so he thought that wasn't very kind of Jesus to go out and be in the temple, be in his father's place, his real father, his biological father, the father, not his legal father, Joseph. So he was in the temple and he was preaching and teaching to people, and Randall Rouser found that disturbing. And see, that's just the kind of thing that happens once you're a progressive Christian. You start looking at all these passages and thinking, ha, I don't know why Jesus would do that. I'm going to question Jesus. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about that because I've got a lot of responses to that. I've given this a ton of thought over the past week or so once I spotted that video. So we'll chat about that, and we'll chat about any other concerns that you have. If any of you guys have any issues that you'd like me to talk about in my videos, or you want to come on my video with me sometime, let me know. I love having people on here, and I will talk to you soon. Have a great day.